I'm Anne Choquette. I am CEO of The List. I am so excited for you all to join us today, Monday, June 3rd, for Launch with The List. Jen Romolini and this amazing book you can see behind her head, Ambition Monster, um, and Catherine Connors, entrepreneur and author, are in conversation. But I think what makes this really special is that they are friends. They are like mutual admiration society. I want to be part of that mutual admiration society as well, because I these are two women. Um, I've admired their careers. I've admired them a little bit more up close. I get to be in community with them at the list. And as you know, we are a small but mighty community of high impact leaders. And I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to Catherine to lead this amazing conversation. I will be posting links in the chat for buying the book because frankly that's what we're here for, is to see this book on the New York Times bestseller list. And in the meantime, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. All right, I will turn it over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for having us both. And thank you for letting me be the one who gets to talk to Jen about her book, This Extraordinary Week, for Launch with the List. I will preface this. Anne noted that we're friends, Jen. And so I feel like I always have to preface this when I talk about your book because we are friends. You're one of my favorite people in the world. And that immediately gives me the appearance of bias when it comes to this book. And so every time I talk to it, I feel like I have to say, we are friends. However, this is the best book. It's phenomenal. It's extraordinary. My own evidence, as you know, is the text that I sent you when I was midway reading a galley. And I can't remember exactly what I said. We both posted it, that it blew, like my heart was in my throat the whole time. So I want to preface this conversation by laying those cards on the table. We know each other. I love you. Some of this journey has been very, very parallel for us, but I can also say, as somebody who is very, very particular about the books that she reads and loves, that this is truly an extraordinary book. I've said these things to you. I will say it to everybody listening who hasn't already ordered it or bought it and should, that it is equal parts art and critique. It is memoir and it is commentary and it is both artistic and poetic and critical and all the things. And that makes it a rich book to be in conversation about, also a bit of a tricky one. This is a really, really, really personal book for you. And that's what makes it so powerful. In the galley copy, it says Ambition Monster. And there's the memoir on the cover, but inside it says A Reckoning. Can we just like start right from there that the book as a memoir is a reckoning and talk about what that means? Because I think that captures the power of what this is.
Well, first off, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm also saying all of these things so I don't start crying. This is me stretching, so I stop crying. Uh, yeah, this book is a reckoning. This book is about class and about the American dream and sort of the lies many of us were told, that if we just worked hard enough and we just put enough of ourselves into things and we just kept achieving, that we were going to be, I don't know, successful. And that I thought that that success meant fulfillment. I mean, I had definitely conflated success and happiness. And turns out about 6 years ago, I reached, I guess I could have set up more summits for myself. I could have been like, no, but wait, more. But I'd reached, sort of like the top title you can have in what I do. I was the chief content officer. I had a book come out. It was well received. I had, a marriage. I had a child. I mean, on paper, I had everything. I mean, Cosmopolitan magazine's calling me up and saying, we want to write a story about you called Get That Life. And I was like, what? You don't want this. This is not the life. So I think that after that and realizing how unhappy I was, and how much maybe I had like outer riches, but I had absolute internal rot.
Mm-hmm.
I started in the past, I would say 5 years, really starting to excavate what was my ambition for, what was it about, and what did I actually want, because this wasn't it.
Mm-hmm. You literally lost your voice. You
Yes.
you hit a moment, and like I remember this in your life, but then like reading it, that you open the book with this anecdote of being on stage and literally physically it shuts down and it became a medical event for you. I mean, signs are signs, right? But it
Yeah.
was your body was telling you that there was something about what you were putting out into the world that wasn't aligned with what you really, really wanted. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that, because there's a scene early-ish in the book in your marriage, and you meet the woman in Connecticut as a potential
Yeah.
place to live. And you describe this beautiful home. And it seemed to me when I was reading it, you were describing a life. It was very simple. It was an artist. There's art, there's pottery. It's like, it's not fancy, but it's rich and it's beautiful. And this is something that you and I've talked about. It's like, what is it all for? Like when we work really hard, when we strive, what is it for? The part of the force of that scene for me was feeling like, oh, like kind of early on, Jen's giving a picture of what it could be for, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the version of hyper hustle girl boss to get to that adorable little cottage, with the art and the pottery and the life well lived and the artistic sensibility. Talk a little bit about how that tension played out for you, because there's so many things we can say about how rocky the journey was and how
Yeah.
fraught and how full of turmoil, how dramatic. But
Yeah.
talk a bit about that tension between what is it for and the kind of life that the Connecticut woman could live, that really seemed to represent something, was sort of like a spoiler in the book of like, well, what about that?
So I think that all of us, the only models we are shown about success is hard charging, and it's hands on your hips, it's Wonder Woman posing, it's titles and promotions and a good LinkedIn profile. But what this was, and I had no models for success in really any way. I mean, outside of movies, I grew up working class. I mean, what I should say is I grew up working class, a child of two teenagers. Neither of my parents had a high school education. Um, so I am entirely self-made. And what I did first in my life before I was self-made was I married really young. I did exactly what my mother had done. I'm Italian American. I married another Catholic, and um, at 21, and I was very, very unhappy. I was so unhappy. It was like a cloak was over me. I felt so like I had done totally the wrong thing. I dropped out of school. So I'm living in Connecticut with this husband who is 100% wrong for me and 100% doesn't care about my life, my being fulfilled, my career aspirations. He can't even conceive of it. And we can't find a place to live in Connecticut, and we're maybe going to live in this woman's back house. And this was an older woman, and she had been an artist in her life, and she had this beautiful house that wasn't about wealth and wasn't ostentatious. It wasn't big, but it was well curated, and you could see that it represented a life of, freedom and adventure, a life that was well lived. And it was the first model for that kind of life I'd ever seen in my life. And I couldn't, it stuck in my brain, and it's stuck with me. I think it's driven a lot of my decisions in these past couple of years as I've tried to get off the career ladder and think about, what does contentment look like? What does peace look like? What does satisfaction look like? None of which I was finding in what I thought was the traditional ladder.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the ways that, one of the things that your book really draws out so powerfully and poetically and beautifully is the ways in which capitalism and the patriarchy and the confluence of these systems, it does so many toxic things to us. But one of the most toxic things it does to us is make us believe that we should want things that we don't really want.
Yes.
Right? You
Yes.
describe in the book work as a lover, right? Like this is something to hang on to. And in some respects, what the system does is it distorts our longing and draws us to things that we can maybe exercise some agency around, but that don't actually feed the soul. And it's that thread throughout the book that's so powerful. This isn't about, oh, I wasn't as happy as I was expecting to be. Oh, I wasn't, that this isn't the devil wears Prada, right? This is, this is actually, no, this is an ache of the soul. This is a distortion of the longing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, if you really just think about it, like it just in most literal terms, like a ladder with this one size fits all, like prescription for success. A ladder is narrow, right? It is one way up and that's it. Life is expansive. Life is gigantic. There's so much to take in, to do. There's so many opportunities that we don't see because we're only looking this way. And I really, it was like once I started seeing it, I couldn't unsee it. And I was like, wait, what? I would be in conversations with people at that success level, and everything just felt so myopic and so limited. And I remember this one conversation, and this is going to take us kind of on a tangent, but here we go. Who cares? These people were talking about their airline miles. And if anybody knows me, they know this story because I still can't believe it. These people were talking, all these executives were talking about their airline miles, and we're sitting at this like dinner, and there's so much food at this table, and nobody's even eating the food, and like it's excess, and everybody's talking about the airline miles. And apparently, there's this one secret airline trick that you do to get miles, but what you do is you get on a plane and you go to Singapore, you take a 15-hour flight to Singapore, and then you get out of the plane and then you come back. You just get on another plane, you come back. And that's the way you game the miles system. And I was just sitting there with all of these people, and I was like, you don't get out of the plane? Like you don't go and like explore the city? Like you just fly for the miles? Like that's it? And it was like one of those things that like broke my brain as I was like climbing and climbing, because when you're like a working class kid, you have no concept for this kind of bullshit. And it was like that was exactly an indication to me that this was not about pleasure. This was not about joy. This wasn't even about like soul fulfillment. No, this was just about like acquisition of power, acquisition of money, neither of which I really gave that much of shit about, So I was totally in the wrong game.
But we're convinced, we get convinced, we're convinced by the system, and this is an ungendered thing, but I think it disproportionately affects human beings who are socialized as women, that is what we should want.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole point. The whole point is to have power, and power is to have the points, literally and figuratively, right? And it doesn't matter what you do with them. The point is just to win. And for women in particular, this is, that the personal, the deep personal heart in your story really underscores this about how this, when we're narratives of empowerment, you and I have talked about this quite a bit, do this all the time. It's like, well, we should want power, right? Because that's how we get away from not having power. And there isn't any nuance to what is it power for? What are we like, are we just really looking for agency, right? And what would that look like? And so that puts us on these extremely toxic tracks often. And for some folks, it's like awesome, right? Like that's the point and that's fantastic. But if your soul maybe wants different things, you not only get frustrated by not having them, as the whole story unfolds for you, but it also it's really hard to figure out that that's what's going on. It's like there's a deception at stake. It took you, I mean, your whole the story spans from your childhood until, very, very recently. And as you said, it's only been 5 or 6 years since there was this like sort of epiphany. I mean, would you call it an epiphany? I mean, it feels like it was a slow realization for you, but
Yeah, it was a cracking open. I mean, because we're set up to believe that this is what we should have, right? And that commit like unimpeachable, like I thought that conventional success, the titles and, a secure wage and just looking good to the outside world would somehow make me feel good. That if my success was unimpeachable, then I must be good. And that my feelings that I wasn't valuable and worthy would go away. That somehow in the process of achieving, and I think this is common for many women, that like we just are like, well, I'm insecure. I have imposter syndrome. Well, if I keep doing it, that's going to go away. I'm going to eradicate that. I'm going to fake it till I make it, and then I'm going to get to the other. I'm going to be like, great, look at me now. But it never really went away. I just was like stuffing shit inside of it, And then the problem was that because I'd stuffed so much shit on top of how I felt, I then had to dig all that shit out in order to feel like a person again.
It's that cracking open, which, as you're just saying, it's like it's not just that one day you crack open and like we have these tropes about epiphanies, right? And they're, religiously informed
Yes.
sometimes. The angels shine down from heaven and the soul cracks open and it all becomes clear. But as you're saying, it's actually work, right? It's actually, you can feel the cracks happening, but then you have to do the like pry it open, get in, dig in. And the hard work of that isn't just because it's deep emotional work. And again, this is something that I felt so powerfully and resonated so strongly with in your book, that it's like there's the mining that you have to do, but it's also hard because it's really hard sometimes to let go of those programmed desires, right? You have like a
Yes.
beautiful scenes where you're like, there's a temptation put in front of you that you don't want, but it's like the whole system has programmed you to want it on some level, that you're going to fight for the thing that you don't want, and getting it's like an addiction, right?
Yeah. So very much when I was thinking about writing the book, very much what was in my mind was I wanted to write an addiction memoir about work. I don't think that we think about work as an addiction. I don't think we think about high achievement as something that, that we can actually become addicted to, but we can actually. It's a process addiction. And we become addicted to the pat on the head, the rewards, the sort of dopamine hits we get from, okay, I achieved that and now my boss liked it. And so pat on the head. Okay, I'm going to keep going. It's like very Pavlovian, right? I'm going to keep going back. I'm going to get the pellet. I'm going to keep going back. I'm going to get the pellet. And once you're in that cycle, it's hard to get out of because you kind of shut out all of the other possibilities of what you can be. And you start having a more and more narrow idea of what's possible, right? Like, well, I could never quit this job because I need to make this much money. I have to have health insurance. Like, or how would it look to everybody else? Like, we get so stuck, and what it requires to get out of being stuck is just this sort of radical thought that like it's not that radical, but it's just like, oh, I don't want this, and I don't know, I don't want a big job. That's such a radical idea. Like still people are like when people are like, I thought you have a much bigger job than you do. And I'm like, why? Like, do I have less value because I'm not don't have a C-suite title? No, I have a better life. I don't know. I don't know. I
But
don't know what the answer to that
but that's
is.
exactly why it's so tricky, right? Because there isn't an easy answer for it. Because of course, especially within circles like this one of women-centered, female-friendly, mutually supportive, boosting environments, we we come to these spaces because they function that way. It's like, of course you should have the big job. Of course you should be able to do whatever you want. And as you know, like, I was part of a layoff at the end of last year. And one of the first things, one of my team members said to me was like, well, you need a bigger job than this. Like, you need to be this, right? I'm like, well, I've been that and I don't know. But when she
Yeah.
said it, I thought, well, of course, like that's what everyone expects. Then I need to move into the next thing. And it has to be up that ladder, as you say, one rung,
Yeah.
then one rung. And so we don't, it's complicated to your point because we don't want to say it's like you don't need to want things, right? We want
Right.
to do both the hype and the empowerment, but we also, there's a sort of toxic seepage and a little bit of a microtoxicity when we assert to people that they should and could and can and must move on to the next big thing. And so pulling away from that is hard. You did. It wasn't easy. And not only did you do it, you chose to turn that process into art. You did not choose to write a thought leadership book of like, the recovering girl boss's guide to work-life balance. What you did was write, as you said, an addiction memoir. You wrote a deeply, deeply, deeply personal, like rigorous self-analysis and exploration of your entire emotional and spiritual landscape for the world. Talk about what that represents in terms of this cracking open and this growth for you.
I mean, I think that, and like, look, it's really hard to get into these conversations, right? Because think about our programming, particularly over the past 15 years, right? Our programming, the whole girl boss programming, the whole yes queen of it all, the whole like, you go, and I got your back, and the shine theory, and we'll climb on each other's backs and everything else. And I get that. And that might absolutely be right for people. And it was not right for me. It sucks to be really good at something you don't like. And ultimately, I was an excellent manager. I was an excellent executive, but I didn't like it and I didn't want to do it. And I think that if there's any sort of takeaway from this book, it's just getting right with what it is you actually want, not some outside idea of what you should have. And just because you can have it all, or you can never have it all, but just because you can have this big position or this, whatever this is, whatever this milestone is, doesn't mean you should or you need to, right? If it's not something that's going to light you up. And by the time I left my last big job, I was fired from my last big job after basically just not putting in an A plus 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 game anymore. I felt so burnt out that I didn't want to work anymore. And that was like terrifying for me because I'd always worked. Work was the biggest force of my entire life. Work got me from one thing to the next. It was a salvation for me. It was survival. So it was terrifying to just feel absolutely numb and also just feel just these waves of grief. And I felt so sad for what I had been a part of. I felt like I had been complicit in inequitable systems. I felt like I had allowed things to happen to me that I shouldn't have allowed to happen to me, verbally harassed, sexually harassed, all of this sort of concessions you make on the way up, right? And I just felt kind of broken. And I spent a long time instead of going right into another job, which I could have done, I just decided to get off the ride and see what was left. Like, what was I? What did I really want? And ultimately, and if you read the book, you'll see this. Ultimately, I had wanted to be a creative person. I am a creative person, but I kind of put my creativity all aside in service of this career. And what really lights me up more than anything is writing, is making something. I made a documentary podcast last year. I never thought I could do that. I took an internship at 48 years old at a podcast studio because I was like, I want to learn about podcasts. I just started having a beginner's mind instead of this like striving mind all the time. I really was like, what do I actually like and want to do before I die? And it wasn't like sitting in another executive meeting, talking about an org chart.
Well, and this is where I think, what you've demonstrated in this book, can really in some respects be summarized as, exhibit A of the power of storytelling to convey not just the work of a process, the pain of a process, but actually the experience of a process, that I think many readers, even folks who are like, yeah, I love my ambition, right? I do want the C-suite job. I think that what you've done is created a narrative landscape on which anyone can walk and ask themselves, how am I thinking about what I want? Right. And again, especially like I think this book is for everyone, not just women, but I think it's particularly notable for women. It's not an accident that someone like Jeremy Irons can decide to go off and study cobbling and everybody thinks it's amazing, right? Women disappear to, to discover what their hearts yearn for. And people are like, where'd they go? They've disappeared. And are they old now? And they've become a witch in the woods.
Right.
It's something that there isn't a template for it, right? I think that when I say that this sort of demonstrates the power of storytelling, of this kind of deeply personal story, for being able to allow people to sort of walk empathetically on a landscape and ask similar questions to the ones that you asked. And even if the answers are not the same, it's the asking of the questions.
Yes. And like, look, there are people out there whose executive functioning is so much better than mine. Like, they're built for this. They're built to be in these jobs, and this job might bring you a lot of reward and your life might be in balance. But when it's not, when you're sacrificing like things that are actually meaningful, your relationships, your place in a community, your friendships, especially as we get older as women, God, I mean, that is the thing I want to invest most of my time in. If it's like just so out of balance, like that's when you start to really have to look at it. Like, what's going on here? Like, if your job's lighting you up and you feel satisfied and like, great. But that wasn't the case for me. And I think I also, to be perfectly honest, I think, I was in a really sort of masochistic relationship with work. I think I sought out really chaotic and toxic work environments. I was trying to play out a chaotic childhood again and again and again, trying to like, maybe this time I'll be the good kid. Maybe this time the result will be different. So there's a lot in the book that's like trying to really connect who we are as children and the things we didn't get. And some of us maybe seeking that in work, our parents were just didn't give us the attention we needed. And like, maybe a boss will, but everybody knows a company's never going to love you.
Well, it's in that respect. I mean, we described it as an addiction memoir. It's a trauma memoir. It's a love memoir. But I think that's like, one doesn't need to have experienced the specific forms of trauma to recognize that, oh, the sort of things that trauma can lead you to gravitate towards still warrant being viewed critically, right? The reason why, work and ambition are such easy things to become addicted to, all the more if you're recovering from something or working through something, is because they offer like dopamine hits, right? They offer and really, really publicly celebrated dopamine hits. And again, if that's like, if the dopamine is good for you, like you can be in a healthy relationship with it. But if really, really what you need like where you're trying to fill a hole, right, of validation, value, this is the aspect of class, right? This is as much a class memoir as well, right? The vein of Barbara Ehrenreich, it's like, this is like, how does class bear upon how we understand ourselves? Like what does it look like when you grow up with not as much in a world that tells you that if you're going to have agency, you have to have a lot?
Well, I think that, people who come from not the most elite class, right, with no pedigree, no connections, no nothing. I think that something happens when you're a working class person where you really do believe in the meritocracy. You really do believe you just swallow down the American dream. And, in some ways I'm the product of the American dream, but it's, first off, it was a man doing it. And second off, it was 50 years ago. The things that, my parents were able to achieve, we can't any longer, like because of housing costs, because of so many things. But when you are thinking that this is a meritocracy, and if only you put in this input, you're going to have this output. And then you get in and you're like, I mean, not to trigger anybody with this word, but you realize that the game is rigged. I was shocked. I couldn't believe when I was at Condé Nast at Lucky Magazine And I was like, I work harder than everybody in this office. Why am I not rising? And it was so much bigger than that. It had nothing to do with that. It was like who was more connected and office politics and who did, the boss vibe with better. Like I didn't know. And the money, a lot of it had to do with wealth and money and how people dressed. I mean, it was a very Chanel haves and Chanel have nots situation. And that was a real shock for me.
I think that's a common experience, sort of even class aside, for women, especially women who are encouraged by anyone, to strive, right? To be ambitious. And we celebrate
Yeah.
ambition. And we should celebrate ambition
Yeah.
because ambition is so deeply toxified for women. And like there's all the dynamics for women and girls that are deeply, deeply, deeply messed up. But I certainly had this experience, right? You and I've talked about this shared experience of that discovery of having that moment of going, wait a minute, wait a minute. Why am I like, I wasn't I supposed to, if I work hard enough, if I'm good
Yeah.
enough, if I'm smart enough, like all I have to do is force my way onto the playing field with the
Yeah.
boys, show how good I am, and then I'm going to get rewarded. When you realize that it doesn't matter, and you're like, oh my God, how was I so ignorant like, of these aspects of the patriarchy, and of
Yeah.
capitalism? And you know, it's it's like a betrayal of some promise that you were maybe made. And in the case that you make, it's like work makes that promise, right? Work hard, right? Be
Yeah.
faithful to work the lover, and work the lover will reward you. And when you discover that work is not a faithful lover, ambition is not a faithful lover, none of these things, none of this is fair. It puts another layer of complication into that like deep heart soul excavation work that you have to do to figure out what you really want. Because God, what does it all mean if you've been lied to all this time?
Well, and we have been lied to because I mean the big lie. I mean the thing is like we're the first generation really after the women's rights movement, and it's the fact that we could meant that we should, right?
Yeah.
And of course, this is nothing new to anybody. But what happened was we got these careers, but we still had all of the other stuff to do. And like if we chose to have children and have partners, we know that the emotional labor of child raising, it falls on women. We know how just sort of stacked the deck is against us, but still we persist. We keep going like, oh, well, no, I'm the one who's going to be able to solve this crisis. Like, I'll just keep doing it. I'll keep remembering everything. What goes into the preschool cubby? Got that in my mind. The swim lessons. Oh, also that meeting, and just keep going and keep going and keep going. And then 5, 10 years later, we're just fried. It's an
Mhm.
impossible equation of our time. It's just it's impossible to do right, and we feel like failures the whole time, or at least I did. I mean, I can't believe how badly I felt about how much I wasn't showing up as a mother. I damned myself all the time, and I was doing the absolute best I could. But I do think it's important to say something here because I think that the title of the book and this conversation can make it seem like, I'm anti-ambition in some way, but I'm not. I'm still an incredibly ambitious person. I love working. Like that's the truth about me. I really love it. I just needed to direct it in the right place. I
Yeah.
needed to get right with myself about what I needed out of work so that I could put all of that energy into things that fill me up instead of like building other people's corporations or whatever else I was doing, like that just wasn't satisfying for me as much as I did like managing, but the rest of it was just not very satisfying.
Well, I think that frame is an important one. It isn't about rejecting ambition. You have been working, as many of us should be, to get into right relationship with work, to have like
Yeah.
the good relationship, to have the balanced relationship, to have the healthy relationship, whatever that looks like, right? And it can look like all sorts of people like thrive you know, in super high stakes, super competitive environments, right? There's something for everybody. So it's not about rejecting ambition.
No.
And this is actually a good segue into a question that Anne put in the chat of like, what does ambition look like for you now? Because this is the question, not about the rejection of it or denial of it or dismissal of it, but about finding out what ambition looks like for you.
I think that the best thing that can happen is if it's internal more than external, right? Like, I love the book that I wrote. I really
Yeah.
love the book that I wrote. The accomplishment is already there for me, regardless of what happens tomorrow or in 3 months or whatever. It doesn't really matter because I already have achieved what I set out to achieve because it's not reliant on somebody else's approval. And I think that that is obviously, has a lot to do with age. It is a lot to do with the privilege of my position because I did work so hard for so long that I feel like I sort of wrestled out a lot of this stuff. But ultimately, I think it's true for everyone, asking ourselves, like we keep talking about these questions of who is this for? What do I want? Am I in the right place? Because we get all caught up in so many ways that we can't do things, right? I mean, this book came out, nobody wanted me to write a second book. My first book, my big agent didn't think that I should write a second book because it didn't perform as well as he had wanted it to perform. And, he was very clear with me, like, I just don't see it. And, I'm 51. I had a track against me in publishing because the first book didn't, sell out or whatever, didn't, buy out the advance. And I was very persistent and very ambitious because I knew I wanted to do this. Like I felt it. And that force, it didn't deplete me. I still feel great about it. Like I can't believe I pulled it off. I feel like I pulled off a coup. Like I love it. I'm so happy. And like, I don't remember feeling that way, when I got like a title change in a corporation. It wasn't for me.
Yeah, I mean, you won for you, right? On the
Yes.
basis of something that you asked yourself, what's like, what do I want? Like, what's going to make me happy? And you fought for that, and winning at that is different from winning at something when you're fighting for someone else. Kimberly has a question of how did the realizations you gained, where is moving, um, through the process of writing the book inform your process of returning to the same sort of work in a senior full-time position, work that's aligned with your previous work? So what's shifted, right? How has writing the book and working through the book shifted the experience to where
So
you are now?
So here's the other thing. Like, not everybody is made for those top positions. Like, it's not necessarily going to make us happy, that's not necessarily the thing, right? So I'm like climbed back down the ladder, basically. Like I'm in a job now. I have a full-time job now that is that also allows me a lot of like flexibility and autonomy. And I'm not managing anyone. I'm not in strategy meetings. I just do the work that I really liked doing all those years ago. Because the other thing is like as you get kicked up higher and higher, you're just pushing paper around, right? You're not doing as much as of the actual work. And if you liked the work, that's always like kind of a shock, right? It's like, oh, I liked the work and now I don't get to do it anymore. So I was very mindful and intentional when I looked for a full-time job that, oh, well, what if I just went into something I was way overqualified for? And it almost feels like fighting the system. I don't know if this is the answer to this question, but it almost feels like breaking something. Like I had to tell everybody, they're like, you're overqualified for this. And I was like, I know, just give it to me, please. I'll be so good at it. And I am, and I'm delighted by my full-time job that also is like, they're really kind to me because I'm really good at this job because it's a job I've been doing for, 15 years. And I didn't necessarily need all the stress of being in charge. And I know that that's like maybe not the thing we want to hear as we're trying to break through glass ceilings and everything else, but I don't think everybody has to break the glass ceiling. We can just support other people who really want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we can break our own ground, whatever that looks like, till our own gardens. I mean, I think, I mean, I wish that we could normalize being overqualified for things, like being able to just like really work hard at things that we're good at without necessarily needing to have the management veneer over it or the boss veneer over it. Um, it's yeah, I mean, I think that if we could normalize more of that kind of work seeking, and again, it goes to the nature of your relationship with work, or the way it's not about rejecting ambition or rejecting relationships with work. Is about figuring out like, well, what relationship do I thrive in? You thrive
Yeah.
in one in which you can be creatively productive.
Yeah.
Natalie was saying that she's noticed she's become habituated to work and to feeling tension when she's not productive. That's deeply
Oh, yes. This is a big
She-
workaholism thing.
How did you disengage from the habit of productivity achievement? That's so hard.
That is so hard, but what you just said, that is one of like the top marks of workaholism. Like that's how they detect it in you. Like when you have that itchy feeling, when you're not working, it's like, where's my laptop? I had to just set boundaries around work. And sometimes most of the time, I mean, look, we're talking about like immense privilege here because work is like money. We all need money and money is survival. And I'm talking about like post that moment, right? When your basic survival is met. Because if you're surviving, like you have to work whenever you have to work. Like I get that. But once your basic needs are met, you're still itchy for more work. Like that's when you start to realize I started doing things like I don't answer email on my phone for the most part. I stop work. I used to stop work at 3 p.m. because I wanted to pick my child up every day. And that was really important to me. There was also a moment in this whole process where I was like, whoa, this childhood is going by so fast. And this is it. I got one shot at this. And I'm giving that shot over to a corporation. Um, so I stopped working at a certain time every day. Like I set real boundaries around my hours. I didn't let it just sort of slip into my whole life. And I pretty much don't know. I mean, I'm in.
Oh my goodness, we lost her.
Jumping in just to vamp until we get her back.
Oh, oh, okay, yeah.
I don't know what happened. That was such a good call. I wonder what happened to her. Well, we'll
She'll
vamp
be
for a
back.
second.
We'll
Yeah,
vamp, we'll vamp for a
hopefully
second.
she'll be back for a second. Catherine, I want to give you first of all, this whole conversation has been really riveting, but I want to give you some shine while we have a moment with you to say what a great moderator you are in this conversation in particular. And I don't know if everybody on this call knows how you have really driven the conversation around women and girls and work and meaning. And do you want to spend 1 second talking about why this conversation is so meaningful to you? Like why does this matter? Why does this story about maybe some of the myths we've been told about what success means in our life, why does that resonate with you in the work that you do?
Sure. I mean, there's the personal aspect of it, of having also been a mostly girl boss in media, on a parallel track to Jen's. It's actually how we met. But in my deep dark past, a long time ago, in the first half of my adult life, I was a scholar and I studied the political philosophy of storytelling with a particular focus on gender and storytelling. And I was very, 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 very committed to that work academically or scholastically because I was interested in understanding how the stories that we tell shape how we understand what women and girls' experiences are supposed to be like, especially about where do we participate, right, in the public sphere. And for most of human history, we've not been able to participate. And so this kind of conversation about being in the public sphere of work what are the narratives that shape and drive us and push us? Even the narratives that we think can be helpful are very, very important to me. As you know, Anna, some folks in the Zoom know, over the course of my post-academic career, I ended up at the Walt Disney Company as head of content for the interactive division, and I led the women and family portfolios and also led some internal strategy work on engaging women and girls. And that was an exercise in both balancing some of the tensions that Jen describes in her book of being in a very sort of ambitious posture. I'd never in my life imagined that I would, never mind work for Disney, but be in the corporate world. So I was very much living through an exercise of having these moments of discovery around my own feminism as a former feminist scholar. In doing the actual work of like trying to advance some shifts in, where different narratives can go. When Jen described that moment that some of us have of being in the room in a workplace and having achieved a lot of things and then realizing that you're fighting possibly a losing battle or what can feel like a losing battle. I had that experience at Disney one or two times of being shocked that, that being the smartest person in the room was not maybe a good thing. And everything that I'd studied around storytelling and all the work that I'd done to date on women's storytelling, in that moment felt like, oh my gosh, is our princesses really the thing to tackle here? And of course they were. But
Right.
yeah, it's a core passion for me. So when I say that, although I have the friend bias here, I can put my hat on. Jen, I'm just going to say more about why I love your book so much.
Oh my God, technical difficulties. Sorry, everybody.
Technical difficulties. I'll just finish
I
the
just
sentence.
jumped in and interviewed Catherine for a minute about
Oh,
her
great.
background.
Fantastic. You guys, I knew you could handle it.
But it leads us back. I was just about to say that it's, and this is where I'll put my own nerd hat on. Once upon a time, I studied gender and storytelling, and it was like a core driver of what pushed me into media, was almost like, I want to figure out what it looks like to succeed here. And the aspect that you were just talking about before we lost you of looking at tackling the tyranny of that impulse to productivity, looking at it through the lens of, I'll force this frame on it. It's like, what is the story of the white life that I want to live? Women don't have a version of the Cats in the Cradle song, right? But we experience it very, very deep. We have our own version of it, but we don't have narratives around that help walk us through what all of those tensions and nuances and conflicts about being in the public sphere look like. What you've done with your book is given us an example of another, like, this is a way of walking through this story, right? It's not a song, but it's a little bit, it gives us that sense of, oh gosh, what's my cats in the cradle moment, right? What's my, oh my God, how many years do I have left moment? What's my, what does my soul really want moment? If there's any antidote to the impulse to productivity for women, it's not to try to solve productivity, but to ask ourselves, what's our soul's relationship to it? What's our heart's relationship to it?
I mean, yeah. And I think that like there is just very much the very simple question of like, what do you want to do before you die? Like what does success actually look like to you? And then sort of tracking back from there. Like I had always wanted to be a real writer, right? I'd never really flexed creative muscles. I was too insecure as a writer, but also just like a survival thing. It was just too hard to get those jobs. I wasn't well placed to get the kind of jobs that I wanted and the kind of work that I wanted. And it just didn't pay enough. I mean, it still doesn't pay enough. Let's be honest. Like books don't pay. I mean, there's like 5 people who make enough money on books to live, but that's fine. I just wanted to be in it. And like, so I'm willing to make sacrifices for it. And the sacrifices don't even really feel like sacrifices because it's something that makes me feel fulfilled. And I think that starting to reframe these conversations around work so that they're much more individual and also that they don't have to be forever. Like I could in 3 years from now be like, oh, I want to do this instead. And there's nothing saying I couldn't, except a bunch of rules that don't necessarily have to apply.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, holding it to that personal relationship, I think, is, and that's what makes it tricky, right? Because
Yeah.
we love to go for the guy. Like I've got tons of them. What are the guides? What are the steps? What are
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
what's the
I
list that
wrote
tells
one.
me?
I wrote a guide. Yeah. Like I know. Yes.
So we have Anne shared a question from someone on the Zoom who wants to remain anonymous. That given what I'm imagining is a commonality amongst many of us here and she prefaces it by noticing the irony of having this conversation in a community space like the lists, right? This is a
Yeah.
women's network, and it's like most of the women in this network are accomplished, right? With a capital A.
Yeah.
So given this, do you think one needs to hit that glass ceiling in order to find the ambition monsters within ourselves? Do we need to reach so-called mainstream success in order to re-examine what that means? Like, is this like, is this just,
Yeah.
right? Is this a luxury of privilege?
Yes. Yeah. No, no, I know. I know. You know, I don't know the answer to that. It might be the case. I might have like always, the thing is, it's like there's a point in the book where, the through line of the book is Kim France, who I don't know if anybody knows Kim France, old sassy editor Kim France. She was my old boss. She's now a podcast partner of mine. We do a podcast for women over 40 together called Everything is Fine. Everything is not fine. At one point, she was very miserable in her high up job. And she was the editor in chief of Lucky. And, at a point, Lucky was just like a very hot magazine. And, she's in Vogue style, street style section. And there's profiles of her in the New York Times. And she says to me, she gives me this warning and she says, don't be in charge. It's really not any fun. And I totally dismissed it because it was a lesson I had to learn for myself. I wish that I had not had to learn that. She was 100% right. And like somebody asked me during this book promotion, somebody like listed everything that I've accomplished, right? And like you did this and you did this. And it looks impressive even to me. But again, this is that conditioning because I know the toll it took on my life. I know that my marriage, I almost lost a marriage that is very important to me. I know how much I sacrificed my health, my well-being, all of it to get there. So I don't know if it's a situation where you have to learn this yourself, and that is the privilege here, but I wish that we did not.
Yeah.
Like, I very much wish we could start reframing things so that we applauded people for like having like, self-regulation and like, being deeply involved in their communities and finding work that is good enough for them. Like putting in, having a balance in their lives. I wish that we could look outside of this. And I don't know if in this capitalist system we ever will. But I wish that we could. I wish that I didn't have to learn that lesson the hard way. I don't look back at any of those achievements and feel good about them. And the reason I don't feel good about them was because I was so unhappy while I was doing them.
Mhm. I think that underscoring that there isn't an easy answer,
Yeah.
noting that really, and I'm saying this by way of a wrap up because we're almost at time, that honestly just raising the question, right? This is the power of um, what I believe your book does, is that it gives us a story, right? It gives us a poetic landscape to walk upon and ask ourselves, oh, what does this mean for me? Right? What is in the way that Cat Stevens did for a generation of corporate men in suits, say, are you spending enough time with your children? Cats in the cradle, silver spoon.
Right.
If we could raise the question more, just raise the question for ourselves more forcefully about what is it that is going to make us happy? And is the thing that I am focusing all my soul's energy on really, really worth it? We can already start to see it, with Gen Z and emerging alpha generations of like
Yeah.
not wanting the same,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
wanting pantsuit feminism, right?
Yeah.
So it's not to, as you keep saying, it's not to reject the ambition, it's to ask, what is my ambition for? And am I
Yeah.
deploying my energy towards ambition in the direction that serves me? And if that means the C-suite, then amazing, right?
Yay.
But if
Yay.
it means having a little cottage with a lot of art and pottery, like your woman in Connecticut, then like being able to say, or celebrating being a stay-at-home mom, or celebrating your partner being a stay-at-home dad, or all the things that are outside the norm of our power narratives. That's I think what your book is urging us to do, is reflection.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. I mean, these are hard. And I have a tricky relationship with privilege, because like, obviously I'm very privileged, but like, I know how hard every step was, every single step. And, I don't think it was worth it.
Mm-hmm. Just asking, and Elise in the chat is just saying, why am I doing this? And it's asking yourself, is it worth it? Again,
Because there's alternatives. That's the thing.
there's
Because you
alternatives.
don't have to be afraid. Like I said, there's this expansive world. There's lots of ways to do this. There's lots of ways to make money. And we get so scared and so stuck. And I was for sure terrified that there was nothing else. And there were many other things.
It
And
could be,
once I started being intentional, because the thing is about ambition, it's what you can see. About being intentional, it's what you can't even possibly imagine. And that's the thrill of life, right? Like,
yeah.
oh my God, this happened. I didn't even know that could happen. But I'm walking down, I'm saying no to things, so I have time to say yes to the right things.
Right. It's paying attention and being intentional. And it's asking yourself, or saying to yourself, maybe you should get off the plane in Singapore and see the city rather than
Yeah,
see the
exactly. And
plane.
not just care about the miles. My God,
Exactly.
I'll never get over that.
You've written, honestly, I've said to you a few times, Jen, if you weren't my friend, there was a moment in which I thought, I wish you weren't my friend so that I could go like stalk you to make you be my friend. It's that the kind of book where you're like, I want this author did something to my soul and my spirit. And I'm so grateful to you for having written that book. I'm, of course, grateful for your friendship, but I'm even more grateful that you did your heart's work and you produced this wonderful story that we can now hold as our own cats in the cradle and cautionary tale and work of poetry. It's a fantastic book, and it's going to be huge.
Thank you. And I am so grateful to you for receiving this book, for seeing it. It's such an intimate book, and it's so emotional that when people feel connected to it, I feel connected to them. And I really just want people to like not be where I was, not have the internal rot that I had. I really want people to sort of redesign and rethink how we can work so that
Yeah.
we can not feel that unfillable hole that work's just never going to fix.
Well, you did it for me, no exaggeration. And you're going to do it for, I'm sure, hundreds of thousands or millions everyone that reads this book. And do you
Thank
want to?
you. Yes, thank you both for such a beautiful conversation. I've put the link to your book in the chat. Everybody, please buy the book. Give her 5 stars on Goodreads and on Amazon when the book goes live tomorrow, and share on social media. And I really am sitting with this idea because I grew up in so much the same, swam in so many of the same toxic waters that you swam in also, and thinking about why do we do it and what are we here for, and beautiful connecting conversations like this is why I do it. So thank you both
Can I
so
say one
much.
more thing, Anne, just to follow up on what you're saying, because I think this is important about Jen's book. Obviously, buy it, read it, and then talk about it. Talk about her book and books like it. The story, like the shifting. It's by talking about this stuff that we shift, that we open up the possibility for being in different relationship with work and with each other, and exploring what we want. So when you read the book, talk about the book. Talk about this. Just talk about this stuff.
I'm going to start a thread on the list. We're going to have more conversation to come. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you,
Thank you for
everybody.
joining
Thanks,
us.
List, and thanks for everybody for coming. Thank you.